So this is a little bit in connection to the foot and ankle work that we've been doing. And this is going to be a long chain. Sorry about this. So when we start to look at the body, later we're going to talk about the big fascia lines as they connect through the body. But there's different lines of force and movement that we can start to concentrate on too. For movement, we don't always follow the direct lines of the anatomy trains fascial lines. And sometimes we have to go a little bit more directly through lines of force and muscle coordination. And we can build muscle chains or develop them and coordinate them in many different unique ways. One of the most basic that's very, very important is this fairly long chain that's going to include part of the glutes, quadriceps, calves, and then some of the foot muscles that press the toe tips and the forefoot, press the toe tips and the mounds of the toes down. These, if we were to go by this being part of the glutes right here, and quadriceps, and calves, and then some of the foot muscles, all together, we're going to create a line of basically contraction or tone that's going to allow us to apply very efficient downward force all the way from the trunk. It's going to go from the hips, essentially over the quadriceps, down the calves. It's going to make a little bit of a turn at the ankle, and then down through the forefoot. The difference on this is if you were to, for example, not utilize part of the hips, this large area of trunk muscles, and you just initiated this from essentially the quadriceps from here, then the response of force that's going to be coming back up starts to get lost right about the top of the thighs. And what you'll see on that is a breakdown in how the spinal column is extended or propelled. If this would be somebody running and they weren't using their glutes very well, they could still carry out a lot of the movement, but their spinal column, their torso wouldn't be projected forward. If this is somebody in a yoga pose, and by the way, this is not taking into consideration a lot of specificity, but this helps to bring on some of our idea here. If this is somebody in a lunge, and they've got their pelvis, and their femur, and their shin, and then their foot, and we've got our quadricep, our gluteus, our calf, Achilles tendon, and then some of our foot muscles, and our toe tips. If this person is essentially locked into one of our other terms, which is a closed chain, the foot's not going to be moving. When they fire up their quadricep, it is going to help apply some downward force. They fire up their calf. If they do that, it's going to apply more downward force as a result of trying to pull the heel up. And if they fire up their footbed muscles, they can apply more downward force to both the mounds and then some of the toe muscles. If we do kind of turn off the glute package, not a very well drawn glute package, then the amount of upward driving force, in an earlier slide that we worked on, how well you press and coordinate down here, if you coordinate it well, results in better upward movement of mass. And then later when we talk about dhatus and prana, we're going to bring this back home into why this is such a big deal. And we're not really talking about sport performance when we get into our conversation of yoga asana, how this relates to prana and tissue. So very, very important to keep that in mind. But if somebody does press down well, and essentially we work this chain, quadricep, calf, footbed muscles, and they press down, the spinal column isn't going to get such an upward press because the muscle chain is broken at the glutes, and the glutes are really what connect the femur into the pelvis. If somebody, for example, was pressing down very well with their glutes and with their quadricep, but they weren't doing much with their calf, the amount of downward force and where it's extended through would be less. And so the amount of upward force that they're going to get in return is also less. In a yoga posture, this is going to mean that the spinal column isn't propelled upward or isn't stabilized upward or extended upward nearly as well. And potentially it even breaks down the greater amount of movement up, so now there's a greater amount of compression downwards. And if the person has a back issue, or even if they're healthy and they lean back, what you'll see is the column begin to collapse back down into its base. It's going to have more mass, more energy, more downward pranic flow in towards the base of the spine, rather than more energy, more mass, more pranic flow coming up out of the base of the spine. And the difference is going to result in a difference in the health of those vertebrae and those discs. And when you look at a person who's better connected through their muscle chain and through some of the connective tissue from a different conversation, and the spinal column gets extended or propelled upwards by a really good downward force, we could say downward flow of prana, the compression is less, the change in development along the spinal column is better. What that person entrains into their system as they leave the yoga mat is much, much healthier. And for example, if this person goes out and does some jogging or does some skiing or skateboarding or whatever, they're much more likely to maintain and even perform better health upwards. And then there's other stuff that we could talk about in the performance of the diaphragm and how the ribs can open up even better for greater breathing, greater clarity, greater calmness. So we haven't gone very far into the prana conversation yet, but this absolutely relates to the downward flow of prana as it's experienced as energy in the movement of force and matter, energy in the form of our bodies or matter. And the change in the body is going to be completely related to how we get the prana to flow. And does our body redevelop in a more healthy way that's going to add to our ability to hold less stress and to shed more stress and to breathe better and to have better internal systems. And this is really what it's about.